Hello and welcome to Philosophy Roulette 43, episode 43. Yeah, cool. Welcome back where we just grab a philosophy paper and review it. Let's see. I tried something, I'm going to try something new. So let's see. We're just going to go most popular. And we're going to apply this and see what happens. And because I'm afraid I'm actually going to do all the analysis and thought papers for the last few years. I'm like looking at them, I'm like, wait, I saw this, I did this one. So the thing is, it's just go through. Oh wait, no, what I want to do actually is, I'll pick a journal. So Continental Philosophy Review is up here, so let's do that. Alright. And look at that. You see this highlight right there? I got it up. I got it highlighted to show me all the short papers. So if they're not reviews, we can actually find a nice short paper. Okay. So just a random thing. Is this a review or is this a Oh, well, I don't want to just do a review papers. I'm sorry. Maybe not the best place to start, but I don't know. So you know what? I don't know. Let's see if it's available. If it's here, I'm going to take a look at it because I don't know. Random old paper. Nope, not available. Okay. So, but it's Journal of Ethics. Let's try that one. Woo! Oh, everything too long. Not going to deal with that. Forgot only long papers. Phil Studies. What does Phil Studies have? Okay, so what is this? This is like 15 pages. I can handle a 15-page one. Let's see, this one here is 14 pages. Revenge is Sweet. Well, that's got a cute name. Let's go take a look at that one. Not downloadable. Let's see if Revenge is Sweet. Revenge is Sweet. Thank you for uploading it even to one of those non-free sites. So here we go. And as always, if you are in the live chat, you can just grab a copy of the paper by typing exclamation point paper in the chat box, and we'll send you to this page, and you can then just follow along if you so choose. Okay, so 21 pages, but double space, so that's cool. A little revenge is more human than no revenge at all. Oh, I agree with that, Nietzsche. We tend to want revenge. Okay, so revenge is sweet. On some understanding of revenge and sweet. And the copula. This paper defends a particular normative claim that getting revenge is good. Dish best served cold. Quite obviously, it isn't good for the person on whom we exact our revenge, at least if we are minimally competent. Nor, of course, is revenge morally good. Perhaps, indeed, there is always something morally bad about it. Still, despite these things, I will argue that getting revenge is good for the person who gets it. This might not be news to non-philosophers. I don't think it's news to philosophers either, to tell you the truth. But it makes trouble for we might well be the dominant philosophical view that relation between morality and practical reason, a view endorsed by those we call angels. And it provides additional support for the existence of an oft-ignored distinction between two types or dimensions of normative strength, justifying and requiring. After presenting the initial case for the goodness of revenge in the first section, I present the angelic view in a little more detail in the second section, alongside another view, one held by those we can call devils. Angels hold that moral requirements are also rational requirements. This is why I will argue they are incapable of acknowledging the goodness of revenge. Devils, on the other hand, are defined as those who hold a theoretical position that entails the positive advocacy of at least some immoral behavior to some people on some occasions. That makes them seem rather normal. I would go with normal, not devil on that case. Sometimes it's good to get someone back, especially if it's not that bad. Depends on how bad we're talking the revenge is here too. I mean, there's some sort of trade-off. I mean, if you're like killing someone in revenge, that might be a little excessive depending on what they did to you. Maybe not, I don't know. But like some little bits of revenge might really be within the it might be a super prerogative not to take that revenge, but just fine if you do. So let's see how this person argues for that though. Happily, there's a vast and large unoccupied theoretical space between angels and devils. One nicely situated position in this vast space is occupied by those we call humans. Yay, humans like us. Humans acknowledge that immoral behavior is sometimes rationally permissible, but also that it is never rationally required. Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Behavior morally is always a rational option. This commonsensical position has received almost no philosophical attention or support. Oh, so sad. My view is that revenge is good for the person who gets it, may seem to make me a devil. It is the point of the third section of the paper to explain why this is not so. The pursuit of revenge, like the pursuit of knowledge or pleasure, may sometimes provide sufficient rational justification for our actions to render them rationally permissible. But I will argue it never rationally requires action. As a result, it is also rationally permissible to forego revenge. The union of these claims seems to me represent a quite reasonable position. Its endorsement, however, entails a robust distinction between requiring strength of a reason and its justifying strength. This is a distinction for which I have argued elsewhere in a variety of ways. Considerations of revenge and the way in which it contributes to the rational state of action provide yet another argument for its existence and importance. Okay, if any of y'all know like the current state of like philosophers in the news, there was some guy, he's just now in jail apparently for doing some heinous stuff, and he had argued for the heinous stuff in the past, saying it wasn't that bad. So I gotta start wondering about this author, like what does this author have against somebody that they're trying to make themselves apologetics, basically. They're trying to rationally explain away their revenge. Yeah. And definitely not attributing the nasty things that guy who's in jail now to this author. Because you can go look up the news if you want to, and I'm not going to get into that. In this section, I will argue that revenge is good for the person who gets it. I will not provide a detailed definition of revenge. Returning injury for injury will serve my purposes. Is that eye for eye, or is this just sort of some sort of injury for injury? I don't know. I'm not associated with that phrase. Since revenge is so closely allied with retribution and justice, some acts of revenge might well be morally justified, but I am not interested in providing an argument that is limited to morally justified revenge, if there is such a thing. Rather, the sort of revenge I am concerned with might well be prompted by losing fair and square in a competition for a promotional or romantic partner. It need not be viewed, even by its perpetrator, as a species of morally unproblematic retribution for a perceived wrong. Of course, we can also seek revenge when we have been genuinely wronged, but even in such cases, revenge is not always or even typically justified by the considerations of justice. In the case of very great wrongs, for example, the proper sanctioning authority will be the state. Well, at least the state says it's a state. As a result, private retribution will be a species of revenge that is not morally justified. Well, according to the state, why would you believe those schmucks? Okay, but yes, the state often is the arbiter. And yet, in all of these cases, I want to say that revenge is a good for the person who gets it. What I mean by saying that revenge is good for the person who gets it is that it is the sort of thing, the pursuit of which for oneself can provide rational justification for behavior that requires such justification. One might see this as supporting only the claim that revenge is reason providing, not that it is good. Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I would be satisfied if convinced readers of this I would be satisfied if I convinced readers of this slightly more modest claim. Yeah, that's probably all you're going to need for most of this. But the link between reasons and values is acknowledged on all sides to be quite strong. buck-passing account of value, for example, simply identify the goodness of a thing with the higher-order property of having properties that provide reasons for favoring that thing. And consequentialist accounts typically explain normative reasons in terms of the promotion of value. So showing that something is reason providing is plausibly sufficient to show that it is good in some way. Moreover, even if the link between reasons and value is not quite as tight as this, revenge has other earmarks of goodness beyond merely providing rational justification. It functions as a goal and is the object of desire. So I will continue to frame the issue in terms of goodness of revenge. Okay, so there could be like, even beyond the revenge, it could give you like a purpose for life. Yeah, it's like, this is, look at this cool underline I got now. Aha, awesome. Okay. Advocates of contemporary theories of reason and value have shied away from the ideas that revenge is good for the person who gets it, perhaps because they do not want to be seen as encouraging immoral behavior. But if we are trying to persuade people to forgo the revenge they are seeking, we are unlikely to gain much traction by implausibly claiming, especially without argument, that it wouldn't actually be good for them if they got it. To those bent on revenge, it certainly seems good, and moralistic insistence that it isn't is unlikely to be taken very seriously. A better strategy would be to convince them of something more modest, but for that very reason more plausible, that foregoing revenge is perfectly rational, even if it isn't what they would most like to do. And we might also point out that giving up their pursuit of revenge is likely to yield them some distinct benefits. There's that scene in Kill Bill where what's her name? Well, Beatrice Kiddo has like the revenge list, or it's a death list, and it's like people that I am going to be taking revenge on, and she just seems so happy making that list. Uma Thurman, excellent actor. One way of arguing that revenge is a personal good makes use of a strategy employed by Mill in Chapter 4 of Utilitarianism. There, Mill argues for his principle of utility by first arguing that happiness is the only good thing. The basis for his argument is a methodological claim about how we can argue that any particular kind of thing, pleasure, knowledge, money, and so on, counts as good. In particular, Mill's view is that human desires and preferences provide evidence that something is good or that one particular good is better than another. Mill also thought that this was the only possible evidence of such things, but we can dispense with this additional claim if we like. If we suppose that the resulting weakened Millian view is on the right track, then I think the evidence is overwhelming that revenge is indeed good, that in Mill's language it can count as part of a person's happiness. Revenge is not an idiosyncratic object of human desire, rather it is as common as the desire for money, power, or knowledge. To those who have it, the desire for revenge does not typically feel alien, like a compulsion. You see, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, did he do a survey? Did the author, I forget who it is, Josh or Gert, do a survey? How did he know this? I mean, he must, or is this personal experience? I wonder. Though this desire may come on like a strong emotion, it does not have the typical profile of an emotion. For example, it does not typically fade away in a cool moment. Rather, it is often very stable desire given rise to by having been harmed, or perhaps more often, more forcefully, by harming of someone for whom cares. These are claims to which many of us can attest from a first personal point of view, and that's what I was getting at. In trying to support his methodological view, Mill, it is true, made an unfortunate appeal to an analogy between desirability and such properties as visibility and audibility. These particular analogies initially laid him open to a good deal of criticism, including the accusation of trying to cross the is-ought gap on a very short bridge constructed from a simple logical entailment. It is certainly true that if we think of desirability on the model of visibility or audibility, it looks as though Mill has only made the trivial point that certain things are possibly possible objects of human desire, not that they are desirable in the normal and relevant sense of that term, according to which desirable is virtually synonymous with good. But Mill's unfortunate rhetorical choice here is easily remedied. For a better analogy, for his purposes, replace the property of being visible with a particular visible quality, redness perhaps. We could also replace the property of being audible, as it figures in this argument, with a particular audible quality, being high-pitched. Then the way the evidence works in each of these domains, value, color, and sound, becomes nicely analogous. The only evidence that something is red is that people see it as red, and the only evidence that a tone is high-pitched is that people hear it as that way. In this sense, that Mill means to say, if we are interpreting him charitably, that desires are evidence of desirability. This allows that some desirable things may well not be desired in certain circumstances, just as some red things fail to appear red. Yeah, I was just thinking this could be like an illusion of some sort. You think it's not red, but it is. Similarly, some things that are red may not appear red, but just as we correct our claims about the colors of objects based on our other visual evidence, we can correct our claims about what is desirable by consulting other desires. If we regard desires in this way, the unprejudiced conclusion seems clear. Revenge is a good. It cannot be denied that some perfectly rational people, perhaps many, do not have vengeful desires. Nor can it be denied that many people who do have them want to be rid of them and sometimes manage successfully to eliminate those desires over time. But neither of these facts undermines a million desire-based argument for the goodness of revenge. Mill himself included in the category of the desirable a huge and heterogeneous collection of things, including the physical and intellectual pleasures and the possession of virtue, power, and even money. This is why he was able to claim that desirable things are numerous in the utilitarian, are as numerous in the utilitarian as in any other scheme. So we should admit that there are many goods that are far from universally desired. Knowing how to play the piano is a good thing, but it is simply not to everyone's taste. Similarly, we philosophers aim at a certain kind of understanding of certain sorts of problems and regard it as good when we achieve it. It's like spicy food. It is really not for everybody. I like spicy food. Its variety is the spice of life. I think that's basically the whole thing here. I mean, there's a variety, and that's the spice of life. Not everyone likes spice. Some people just like it bland, and that's okay too. But you have to admit, the variety is the spice of life quite often. So revenge is just one of these spices, is the upshot of all of this talk. Alright, so let me finish it up. But no one would claim that every rational person has the same. When we are using desire as evidence of desirability, there is therefore one important disanalogy with the case of redness in visual experience. Every person with normal color vision in the right sort of circumstances will see a red object as red, but the more moderate claim in the case of desirability is that desirable things are those that some rational people desire. Like, this is what I'm saying about spicy food. Being wealthy is good, though many people do not have a desire for wealth. Yes, but nobody wants to be poor. Like, I know that. Like, there's no goal in being poor. I mean, no one wants to go hungry. Being good makes something eligible for rational desire, but it does not in any way compel it. Yeah, I think spiciness would be a nice example up here. It's like some people like certain kinds of foods, other people do not, and it's like some people just like it hot, and it's like they really like it hot, so that's okay. As to the fact that many people who have desire for revenge try, sometimes successfully, to rid themselves of this desire, it too is no evidence that revenge is not good. The pleasure of eating rich desserts is good, but many people work to rid themselves of a desire for such things. And similar claims are true for power, control over the events of one life, and many other goods. In some such cases, the pursuit of these goods brings with it unavoidable costs. In other cases, their pursuit is doomed to frustration. And in other cases, including that of revenge, a concern to act in a morally acceptable ways opposes the desire. All these cases, we can acknowledge both the goodness of the object of desire and rationality of the second-order desire to be rid of it. What are you saying there, Silent Willow? The problem with Mill's denouement on the revenge is that he based his conclusion on a singular outcome, that it was ultimately successful. Maybe your message got cut off. It looks like you might have something more to say. Anyway, let me finish up the paragraph. Similarly, the fact that revenge is so often disappointing provides no evidence that it is not good. A lot of things are disappointing, that's fair. People who want wealth or fame to finish their books are often perhaps typically disappointed if and when they achieve these goals. That's very depressing. But these goals still count as good. The common phenomenon of disappointment says more about how we motivate ourselves to make sacrifices on the course of longer-term projects by a myopic focus or by exaggerating the importance of our goals than it does about whether or not our goals count as good at all. Yeah, well, what the author was saying earlier about it was Mill made a mistake in sort of the sort of thing revenge is. You have to be more. Oh, okay, that never says. Yeah, that's fair. The author here, though, is trying to correct Mill's approach. So the author here is saying, yeah, it can fail, but so do lots of good things that you want. That also fails. So you can't count that against revenge as a good. You can count that against Mill's. Yeah, I agree that you could probably count that against Mill's position, but you can't count. But the author here is like, nah, a lot of good things fail, so that doesn't mean it's not a good. Okay. Here's a distinct strategy for arguing the goodness of things, one that I have defended elsewhere that yields the same conclusion as Mill's with respect to revenge. We can replace Mill's first personal response, desire, with the third personal response of regarding other people's behaviors as rational in the weak sense of not being irrational, as making sense. The resulting method takes the following as evidence that something is good, or regarding other people's pursuit of that thing as making sense, even if it involves a non-trivial sacrifice. In claiming that the behavior makes sense, what is meant here is not merely that it is psychologically explicable, as irrational emotional outbursts can be. Rather, what is meant is that it is not the sort of behavior that we regard as indicating any sort of mental problem, such as depression, addiction, delusion, overpowering emotion, and so on. One clue as to whether we are regarding their behavior in this way would be our tendency to reduce the degree of responsibility for their actions. Since we do not reduce moral responsibility for vengeance simply because it is vengeance, it looks as though we regard the pursuit of revenge as rational in the relevant sense. Okay. Yeah. The understanding of rationality at work in the above criterion is admittedly a substantive one rather than a formal one that makes rationality something more like mere internal coherence. After all, it is easy enough to imagine crazy people whose desires are as internally coherent as those of the sanest of our acquaintances. It is a substantive conception of rationality that we are using when when assessing people as depressed, addicted, or overpowered by emotion. We classify them in these ways when they do not respond to substantively specific incentives, such as the risk of pain, death, or injury, in the right way. But reliance on a substantive account is not a liability in the present context. First of all, this paper is primarily addressed to those who already agree that there are substantive goods and harms. The question is whether or not revenge should have a place on the list of goods. But more importantly, it is simply not the goal of this paper to refute the position of the devils, many of whom endorse formal desire satisfaction theories of rationality. Rather, the goal is to use reflection on the nature of revenge to motivate and explain an attractive commonsensical position between the extremes of angels and the devils. Appealing to the third-person substantive rationality and responsibility attributing criterion above, it is not controversial that revenge has a profile of a personal good. Yeah, like goal-directed and possibly with happy outcomes for the person doing it. Okay, even if we are not vengeful ourselves, we immediately understand the vengeful behavior of other people. That is, we understand why someone might make a sacrifice in order to get revenge. In this way, it is completely unlike Anscombe's famous saucer of mud. Someone who pays good money for a saucer of mud, someone who does not want it for some other purpose, and who does not get enjoyment or other pleasant feelings from possessing it, has a psychological problem. Perhaps the desire is the result of a hypnotically induced compulsion or an aneurysm, but someone who pays good money for revenge is not like this. Of course, like all goods, it is possible to have an irrationally powerful desire for it, so powerful perhaps that it might mitigate responsibility. It typically would be irrational in the substantive sense at issue to sacrifice one's life for revenge. There's martyrs out there, but that's a sort of like an extreme case. Indeed, it would be typically irrational to sacrifice one's job for revenge, but the same things are true for other uncontroversial goods. Well, it depends how, lots of people, if you have a crappy job, are more than happy to go out with a bang. So, and it's like the joy in telling off your boss or screwing over some, buddy you don't like at work might entirely outweigh the job if you're not going to starve. But the same things are true for other uncontroversial goods. Yeah. I would pay a lot to be rid of my chronic back pain. Yeah, see, that's the other thing. What would you do to get rid of your knee pain or your back pain? A lot of, chronic stuff. I would forego even a guaranteed treatment if it would cost me my vision and my capacity to do philosophy. Yeah, see, that's bad. Like, if you're just like, I'm giving everything up to be out of the pain, you got a lot of pain. And it's understandable. People are willing to do crazy things to get rid of pain. And given the fact that my back pain is tolerable, it would be irrational for me to make either of these sacrifices. And all these things, proportionality matters. As Susan Yanaki nicely puts it, objections to hasty and immoderate retaliation do not tell us why we ought to refrain from calculated, cold-blooded revenge. I'm starting to like these people. Well, if you have the best job and still sacrifice it for revenge, that revenge must be better than the best job. I mean, you must really, 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 really want to get that revenge then. I mean, it does happen. It's like, well, I don't actually know if that happens. I've seen stories where that happens because that would be an exciting story. Like everything to get some revenge. Well, I don't know about well, that's the question. Why is it irrational? This seems like right here. Why aren't we refrain from calculated, cold-blooded revenge? This seems very irrational. That's like the whole point of this thing, is that the revenge is not emotional or irrational. It's calculated and cold-blooded. It's like 100% sort of like rational, like decision theory style. Here is yet another reason for regarding revenge as a personal good. It appears capable of giving meaning and purpose to life. We don't deserve revenge on it. We're not. Yeah, but the good point. But this author has made it very clear at the start that they don't care about the person getting it. There's only a personal good for the person dishing it out. Here is yet another reason for regarding revenge as a personal good. Personal good. See, personal. It appears capable of giving meaning and purpose to a life. As I mentioned before, the Beatrix Kiddo in Kill Bill. I was like, I'm going to kill everybody. Lots of purpose. Bernard Williams makes a distinction between the objects of desire that can themselves provide a basis for desiring to be alive and experience them, and those that do not provide such a basis. In order to make this distinction clearer, Williams has us imagine someone who is seriously considering suicide. What sort of desires might convince such a person to remain alive? Well, I don't know. Silent Will. This is assuming someone has good reason for revenge, so... Well, or at least there might be some good reasons. Not one might plausibly think the desire to watch the next episode of a favorite television series. And this is true even though conditionally on being alive on Thursday, he certainly wants to watch it. Rather, the sort of desire Williams is thinking of, he calls them categorical desires, or ones that provide a reason to keep on living, potentially through some hardships, in order to satisfy them. Oh, to tell you the truth, I mean, I exist on, like, medical technology and spite. Like, seriously. Like, there's no reason for me to be doing anything. But, I mean, it's not revenge. It's just like, guess what? You can't stop me. I'm gonna do stuff. And I'm gonna read philosophy papers live on air and talk to people about it. Ultimately, it is these desires that Williams suggests gives meaning to life. This does not give meaning to my life, but this is fun. It should be clear that the desire for revenge is, at least in some cases, categorical in this way. The story of Hugh Glass has been made, that's a good story, has been made into 2 movies, not because we are interested in stories of irrational obsessions, but because we are interested in stories of the pursuit of important and meaningful personal goals. Indeed, the existence of the genre of revenge stories seems to me to have much the same explanation, at most general level, as that of the genres of love stories and detective stories. In all these cases, people are pursuing what we rightly regard as important goals, and they achieve them, or don't, in which cases we often feel a sense of pity. The goodness of revenge, like that of love or justice, reaches beyond even the bounds of death. We understand someone who dies to save someone she loves, or who dies in the pursuit of justice. Similarly, what do you got there? Is that singular reason to hurt them? I think the author is actually mostly on board with what you're saying, Silent Willow. It's, an act singular of reason, to hurt that which was hurt me. No, I think the author's right. They said that briefly in the beginning, and the question was exactly what's the hurt that you're like trying to account for. So there is a disconnect there. Like exactly how do you or how does the revenge match up with your hurt? Like I'm not exactly sure how that sort of calculation is made, but yeah, but assuming that someone makes such a calculation, then it's just after that, it's just like, this is my motivating factor, and this is what I'm gonna do because I want to get the revenge. Okay. Similarly, when the stakes are extremely high, it is perfectly comprehensible that someone might be willing to die in pursuit of revenge. For hate's sake, I spit at my last breath at thee. Incidentally, I wonder who that's from. It's a nice quote. Incidentally, the fact that people may sometimes be willing to sacrifice their own happiness for revenge strongly suggests what is independently plausible in any case, what is desired when one desires revenge is not particularly feeling of satisfaction. Oh, thank you, Silent. Well, I'm super well read, you can tell. Wish I was better read. Rather, what one wants is just what it seems to one that one wants. The thing that should go very badly for certain. That things should go very badly for a certain someone. Perhaps revenge suicides intended to make someone feel terribly guilty, are almost always irrational in the substantive sense we are working with. They are the result of romantic obsession. Okay. Yeah, I guess it is Shakespeare then here. Oh, it's Moby Dick. Oh, that's cool too. But now this is more like the suicides. We've gotten to the Shakespeare. Hi, Romeo and Juliet. The result of romantic obsession or overwhelming emotion one ought to know will pass. But despite this, such suicides reinforce the following psychological point. What we aim at in aiming at revenge is not an anticipated pleasant feeling of satisfaction. Here is a final point in favor of the goodness of revenge. Even those who would never themselves take revenge on anyone may well engage in harmless revenge fantasies, but the very existence of such fantasies strongly suggests that even these upright people regarding revenge as something good. They would not act on these fantasies only means that there are considerations both moral and prudential that they care about more. Their fantasies allow them to enjoy the good and in imagination without worrying about the wrongness of pursuing it or the dangers involved. It is hard to understand these fantasies in any other way. Why would people fantasize about getting that which they did not think of as good? That's a fair point. Like, cause what I think everybody wishes it. Like, oh, I wish I got that guy back, or I said something and that guy felt stupid. And even at that sort of just little thing, and you think about that, it's like, well, why would you bother thinking that if making the other person feel bad in that case didn't make you happy? Okay. There are not, to my knowledge, many explicit arguments against the rationality of revenge behavior. John Elster does make the following claim. The most plausible explanation for revenge behavior lies in the psychological propensities that do not appear to serve any individual social or genetic purpose. Alright. But we should note that this complaint simply assumes that getting revenge cannot be an individual purpose, as, for example, pleasure or power might be. Elster's claim is simply begging the question against someone who takes revenge as a non-instrumental good. Perhaps more importantly, Elster's discussion of revenge exclusively concerns revenge killing. Yeah, that's kind of hardcore. Indeed, a special kind of revenge killing, the sort that is underwritten by social norms of honor. Oh, honor killings, yeah. Yeah, that's a big topic on its own. As a result, his discussion is of little relevance to this paper. It is unclear, in fact, whether he is discussing the value of revenge, or, as seems more plausible to me, the disvalue of dishonor. Yeah. Well, honor should be studied. That's a good point. The sort of revenge I'm considering is virtually the opposite of what Elster considers. For Elster, revenge is paradigmatically public. Honor is closely linked to the idea of saving face, and one's face is a public entity. Yeah, there's a reputational thing here. That's a good point. Revenge and reputation and honor is and that'd be an interesting topic too, but it's not what this person is discussing. For me, if one can get one's revenge in private with no one the wiser, except perhaps the one upon whom one has wreaked one's revenge, so much the better. Honor is beside the point. Angels and devils. I hope I have made plausible the idea that revenge counts as a personal good. Let me now draw out some theoretical consequences of this idea. In doing so, why would you disagree on that? In doing so, I will be assuming two things about practical rationality. First, I will assume one needs rational justification if one is acting in a way that one knows will bring one harm such as death or pain. Second, I will assume that something's being a good entails that its pursuit for oneself can provide such justification, and again, this does not mean that it always provides sufficient justification. Pleasure is uncontroversially good. From this it follows that some actions that would otherwise be irrational are irrationally permissible because of the pleasures they promise. But that certainly does not mean that it is rationally permissible to risk one's life for the pleasure of a good meal. Okay, so again, we're talking about honor and the understanding of how prevalent it is then. Sure. Actually, I'd grant that. We haven't really got enough of an understanding of honor, just in general. And it really seems to matter. Like reputation, public reputation is a difficult topic. And so, maybe, yeah, alright, so maybe he dismisses it too quickly. But I think it's fair enough to say that under his conception, he's just worried about being happy about getting revenge. Yeah, so since his topic is just being happy about getting revenge, we gonna have to give him a pass, maybe? Perhaps that is, perhaps, I don't know. But he has not made a claim along those lines yet, that personal worth. He's just calling it a personal good. And so how you cash it out is that personal worth, like a self-esteem that you had to get the revenge to feel better about yourself, or is it just like a good meal in some sense? Like he's just talking about something pleasurable, then that would be a good way to question what's going on here. Depends on, yeah, exactly how prevalent you think honor is. First, let us survey from a very great height the existing views of the relation of rationality to morality, given the tendency of the philosophical imagination to explore and colonize every available conceptual position. You're giving philosophers way too much credit. It is surprising that most moral theorists fit into one of two widely opposed camps. I don't think it's splitting hairs. Honor is a tough topic, so especially public reputation, it's not talked about enough. There's actually a very good book a few years ago by Gloria Riggi, a Italian philosopher, and she had a whole book. It was an excellent book, and it's really, she made the point that like she scoured. I agree, but like how understanding good and honor and all work together is just very hard to do, actually. And so she said she scoured like just everything, couldn't find that much on the topic, actually, how to understand these, like how like the good in the decision theorist sense matches up with the social thing that is honor and other stuff. So there's definitely work to be done in that area. We need more understanding of it. Where was I? One standard camp is occupied by those who think that rationality requires us to be moral. Often they are called moral rationalists, but I am calling them angels. This group includes Kantians of many sorts, but also seems to include many contractualists and consequentialists as well. It might even be taken to include many anti-realists about morality, according to whom there is something rationally incoherent in the attitudes of someone who sincerely judges an action to be morally wrong, but then goes ahead and performs it anyway. Widely, did I get your points out, Lionel? I hope I did. Not entirely sure. Widely separated from angels are those who think that rationality might sometimes require immoral behavior, at least for certain agents on certain occasions. This group doesn't have a standard name, but I'm calling them devils, since they sometimes claim it would be irrational to act morally. Such a claim is eo ipso a recommendation of immoral behavior. At least this is true if we understand irrational as voicing criticism that is, by definition, unanswerable by appeal to sufficient reasons. And this is the standard understanding of irrationality. There cannot be sufficient reasons for irrational behavior, since the existence of such reasons would simply show that the action was not irrational in the first place. The devil's camp may have less internal variety than the angels, but they still make up a large group. They include, for example, many humans about practical reason who think we are relatively unconstrained in the content of our basic desires. Any such theorist who is willing to talk about morality in the standard system of rules that include prohibitions on killing, hurting, deceiving, and so on, will also hold that maximizing the satisfaction of our considered preferences or acting in ways coherent with our deepest and most abiding desires will sometimes be at odds with morality. Given the link between moral responsibility and rationality, for example, that we often excuse people, at least partially, when their behavior stems from irrational desires or aversions such as phobias or compulsions, it seems plausible that we do not regard immoral desires in themselves irrational. After all, despite the fact that irrational desires often function at least partial excuses, our default position when someone acts immorally is to regard that person as responsible for that immoral behavior. So common intuitions are in some tension with the angelic view, which would seem to suggest that just as immoral action is irrational, so too are immoral desires. But devils do not fare much better than angels when it comes to fit with common intuitions. For example, consider the plausibility of the ought implies can dictum in the domain of morality. This dictum is unwritten by an intuition that it would be wrong to hold people to a moral standard that they simply cannot meet. One plausible basis for this intuition can be found in the following two things: the fact that immoral behavior typically makes one liable to punish or blame, and the conviction that it would be wrong to punish or blame people for things they cannot avoid doing. But for similar reasons, the same plausibility attaches to the intuition that it would be wrong to hold people to a moral standard that they have to be irrational to meet. That is, there are reasons to endorse ought implies rationally can principle, the idea that if we morally ought to perform a certain action, it would be at least rationally permissible, not crazy, to perform it. But this is inconsistent with the devil's position, so common intuitions are in some tension with the diabolical view. Okay. The surprisingly large no man's land between the angels and devils, in the surprisingly large no man's land between angels and the devils, one spot that is quite attractive, especially given the tensions involved with the other two views, is occupied by those we might call humans. Contrary to the angels, humans only hold that morally required behavior is always rationally permissible, not that it is always rationally required. But contrary to devils, humans hold that behaving morally is always rationally permissible. Despite the advantages, the only philosophers I'm aware of, excluding the present author, who explicitly endorse such a position are Bernard Gert and Michael Smith, and of those two, only Bernard Gert does so in a loud voice. Again, it is not my intention to offer knockdown arguments in favor of the human position here. I describe it only to show in the following section that admitting the goodness of revenge, though it may force one out of the angels' camp, does not force one into the devil's. There is, therefore, a position that is not only independently attractive, not only free from the tension that plague both angels and devils, but one that is consistent with the arguments offered in the first section of this paper. Yeah, it might go that way, so well, I don't know. It's going to be a fine line to keep yourself from sliding either into the angels' camp or the devil's camp. So have to see where we get. Still got I'm thinking about 5 more pages before we get to the references, so it has to make some claims right here that are going to make a difference. Consider the sorts of acts that stand in need of moral justification: breaking a promise, hurting someone, and so on. We call these violations of moral rules, as long as we keep in mind that such violations can sometimes be morally justified, by considerations of self-defense, for example, or because some other moral rule has greater moral significance in the particular case. Angels hold that when agents lack adequate moral justification, violations of moral rules are not only immoral, but also irrational. But since they are not devils, they also hold that as soon as one has sufficient moral justification for breaking rule, one also has sufficient rational justification for doing so. So angels are compelled to hold that moral status and rational status change in tandem in cases in which we are justified violating moral rules. As a result, angels cannot allow for the existence of considerations that provide rational justification without providing moral justification. Are there any considerations that provide rational justification without providing moral justification? Okay, so rational without moral. So we're going to do rational but not moral. And these are all justifications. So there's always a question about exactly what counts as justification, but that's not really what this author wants to talk about. It seems so. Revenge, if it is the sort of personal good I have suggested it is, provides some measure of rational justification. But no one, at least of all an angel, would hold that revenge provides moral justification. You see, here's what they're doing. The author's doing, trying to pull the moral and rational apart. So it's an interesting strategy. You don't have to, of course, you don't have to buy what this author's saying, but it's an interesting strategy to say in the world of justification, the moral and rational can be separated cleanly. Okay. So if revenge can ever provide sufficient rational justification to mitigate the prima facie irrationality that angels see in violation of moral rules, we'll have a counterexample to the general angelic position. And there is no non-ad hoc reason to deny that this might happen. All we need to do is to imagine an act that is immoral because it's almost, but not quite justified, even according to an angel, by the fact that behaving as one is morally required to behave would involve significant personal cost. That is, we are to imagine a personally costly moral obligation, one that is so costly that the agent would be almost justified in failing to discharge it. So you promised you'd give someone a lot of money, you lose all your money, but now you're going to have to break your promise because you're broke, but you could still do it, but it would be really painful for you. I mean, it's probably happening a lot in this economy. Now we need only to make one modification to the case. We add that by choosing the immoral option, the agent would also obtain revenge, which we are stipulating to provide a measure of rational justification, but no moral justification. Okay, so the person you owe money to, he's a complete jerk, and screwing him over would just make you the happiest thing. But you did promise, and when you promised, you had plenty of money, so it wasn't a big deal. But now it's a big deal, so you're going to be super happy about screwing this guy, and he can't get you back. Okay, that's the situation at least. Call such a case balance tipping revenge. What reason could there be to deny that, in such a case, the prospect of revenge, while leaving the moral status of the act as it was, that is, leaving it morally unjustified, provides sufficient rational justification? It may seem to some readers that I'm committed to the idea that if one could get a slightly better revenge than one gets in balance tipping revenge, or if one could get that revenge in a slightly less risky way, then it would become rationally mandatory to seek it. I think this is what you're worried about, the slippery slope here. Like, you could keep going, getting more and more revenge, or not. As a result, it may seem that I belong in the devil's camp. Happily, this is not true. I don't know if I believe you, author. Even if a set of goods is more than sufficient to rationally justify an action, that same set of goods need not rationally require the action. Fair enough. Okay. I have in many other places and in many different ways defended the existence of a robust distinction between what I call the justifying strength of a reason and its requiring strength. That is, I have defended the idea that given a reason can often justify us in making far greater sacrifices than it can require us to make. I will not repeat those arguments here. Rather, I will simply note that considerations of self-defense in the domain of morality provide a useful model of what I am claiming is true in the domain of rationality and reasons. That is, self-defense can provide a great deal of moral justification, but is, on many plausible moral views, simply incapable of, on its own, generating any moral requirement. In asserting that revenge can rationally justify action without ever requiring action, my claim is that in the domain of rationality, revenge shares an interesting formal feature that self-defense has in the domain of morality. Okay, I see what they're saying. That's interesting. It's like, well, there's requirements and justifications and requirements. Now, again, we'd have to go back and look at this author is making claims about other things they've written, so I don't actually know what those arguments are, but it's plausible that there's a difference between requiring action and justifying action. The above points about the distinction between justifying strength and requiring strength were presented in terms of practical reasons rather than goods, since that is how I have presented them elsewhere. But it's easy enough to translate. We can say that many goods are rationally optional. They are genuine goods and their pursuit can rationally justify sacrifices, but from the point of view of rationality, one need not care about them that much, or indeed at all. Many goods seem to be like this. For example, it's perfectly rational to make significant sacrifices for the sake of gaining the ability to speak Spanish or to run a mile under 5 minutes. but it is also perfectly rational to decline to make even quite small sacrifices to gain these abilities, and the same goes for many other goods. Of course, in the case of goods such as abilities or freedoms, there is at least some plausibility to the idea that one would indeed be rationally required to get them if one could do so at no cost whatsoever. That is, in language I have used elsewhere, there is some plausibility to the idea that our reasons to pursue these things have some, perhaps quite minimal, requiring strength. If so, they would not be purely justifying reasons. But even if this is true, and I am not saying that it is, this would not undermine the idea that many goods can rationally justify far more than they require. Still, the fact that these reasons are not purely justifying muddies the water somewhat. This undermines the usefulness of appealing to such goods when arguing with people who are disposed either not to understand or not to accept a robust justifying requiring distinction. Yeah, these distinctions are a little tenuous. As a result, revenge has a great advantage when one is trying to illustrate the distinction. As I have been arguing, it is very plausible that revenge can provide rational justification. I'm liking this red underliner. Oops, missed it. Rational. But it is equally plausible that it cannot rationally require us to pursue it at all. Can't force you to just because you have a reason to. That is, it is very plausible that revenge provides practical reasons that are purely justifying. So, I think this is part of what a commenter was saying, that separating good from honor is like you can't really separate out just the rationality from the rest of the person. So, anyway, yeah, there's a question of exactly how much can we actually pull out the rational from what we causes to act. And this person, the author here, needs a very strong way to separate rational from the motivation to actually pursue it. Excuse me. Okay, theoretical underpinnings. In arguing that revenge is good, I have, among other things, appealed to a methodology for normative theorizing that takes certain human reactions as evidence for normative claims. Yeah. These reactions included desires and third-person assessments of the behavior of others. This may be unsatisfying to Kantians of the sort who hold that we can prove the goodness from what is good from purely formal principles of some sort, but it is worth noting that a number of prominent contemporary ethical theorists do not provide any argumentative defense of basic normative claims at all, and explicitly hold that there can be no such arguments. T.M. Scanlon, Derek Parfit, and Jonathan Dancy, among others, take the concept of normative reason as basic, just as I, for purpose of this paper, am taking the notion of good to be basic. Given the intimate relation between reasons, goods, and harms, there is not really much difference between their stance and mine. Indeed, though I put my position by saying that revenge is good, I would be perfectly happy to recast it as the claim that revenge is reason-giving. But that does not mean Scanlon, Parfit, Dancy, and I are on equal footing. They do not argue that any particular substantive considerations provide basic reasons. Rather, they simply make some exceedingly plausible claims about which things do provide reasons. I, on the other hand, go at least slightly further. I suggest that certain human reactions provide evidence for certain basic reason claims. I'm with the author here that human reactions. I think I was reading something earlier, and it's like, well, there's evidence given to us by our phenomenology that was a mereology paper, that there are two different things, and if you get like phenomenological evidence that it's not the same thing, that may not be great evidence, but it's still evidence. And so you might have, there's other ways to argue for human reactions to provide evidence for certain basic reason claims. Okay. It's worth noting well that Scanlon, Parfit, and Dancy all endorse positions that are very friendly to the justifying requiring distinction. For example, Scanlon has recently made the following claim: reasons can render an action rationally eligible without making it rationally required in the absence of some countervailing reason. No, I really can't explain what their reason claims mean. You'd have to go back. I mean, I think it was a little clearer earlier in the paper, but this is the whole distinction that the paper is resting on, that you can give reasons for something, but that's not going to force you to act. Like, it's just going to give you some rational justifications, but that's about it. Like, it's just the sole rational justifications, separate from any motivating thing. Like, you're not forced to act on those rational things. So this is just the assertion that some reasons can justify without being able to require. Yeah, see? So justify without being able to require. The requirement is different. So you get the reasons and they give you justificatory things. Oh no, I don't claim to be with the author. No, I'm just reading this as I go. I don't quite know all the things that are going on. Sorry. I'm just trying to figure this out myself. This is just the assertion that some reasons can justify without being able to require. Dancy, too, seems friendly to the justifying requiring distinction. One way this friendliness appears in his distinction between what he calls enticing and peremptory reasons. You see, the author here is trying to give a whole bunch of things to explain what they're saying, because they probably didn't do it that well. So that's why they're giving this theoretical backing here, because they realize that the distinction is not clear. And that's part of the rhetorical force of this whole section, is to actually make this at least philosophically justified, this distinction that they're holding. Reasons can generate ought and reasons that cannot. In fact, I suspect this particular distinction, as Dancy presents it, is best explained as a distinction between very weak reasons and very strong enough to generate oughts. But many other theorists have interpreted Dancy's distinction as a version of the justifying requiring distinction, and even I see it as an attempt to capture something similar. But we can put this issue to the side, since there is distinct and better reason to view Dancy as sympathetic to a robust justifying requiring distinction. In particular, he claims that disfavoring and favoring are distinct relations, so that a reason can favor an action without disfavoring its omission. This means that a reason can neutralize reasons against an action without itself making it irrational to fail as it directs. And this just means that it can have justifying strength without having requiring strength. Finally, Parfit is clearer that while it is perfectly rational to make a large sacrifice for the sake of someone else, the extremely imprecise nature of comparisons between personal and partial reasons means that it is also perfectly rational to refuse to make even a small sacrifice to spare someone else a great deal of harm. For the reason for this, in Parfit's terms, is that it is not determinately true that even a small personal sacrifice provides a weaker reason than does the reason that involving avoiding a great deal of harm for a stranger. Oh, that's a hard sentence. This is not precisely an endorsement of the justifying requiring distinction, but it allows one to reach the same normative conclusions one would reach if one held that altruistic reasons to have far more justifying strength than requiring strength. Given the above, anyone who has sympathy for the views of Scanlon, Dancy, or Parfit should give little reason to protest against the views expressed in this paper, nor should anyone who, like Mill and other advocates of this response-dependent account of the good, takes human responses to provide the only or the best evidence that something counts as good. Those who think they can derive substantive evaluative claims from purely formal principles will remain unconvinced. All I can do here is register my skepticism about such views. Conclusion. It may initially seem as though the goodness of revenge is not a particularly important issue, but it is. It goes some way towards undermining the angelic view, and to the degree that one takes the devil's view to be misguided, since it says that we are sometimes irrationally required to act immorally, the goodness of revenge also provides support for a robust justifying requiring distinction. There is a natural, if somewhat moralistic, hesitation to openly declare the goodness of revenge, even if one qualifies this declaration by saying that, like many other goods, we are not rationally required to pursue it. But an honest assessment of the facts should allow us to overcome some such misplaced scruples. And there we go. There's the references. Alright, so that's fun. I mean, the author definitely has put themselves out here and said, look, all these moral angels are just misguided. That's not how humans are. I don't know how you can say it any stronger than that. It's just like, this is a completely non-human, like it's a sort of a completely idealized view, since they say the spice between the angels and the devils is the human, and therefore all the angels are basically inhuman. Now, of course, as the author has taken pains and we have discussed in chat, is this justifying requiring distinction. How much can we really push on that distinction, and how much do we really understand it? I don't know. This is not, I've not heard this, I've not thought about this much. But Generally, I think this was a fun paper. It was argued reasonably well. There were a few like spots where maybe a few different examples from a different like areas might have gone a little bit, but yeah, a little revenge is no more human is more human than no revenge at all. Thank you, Nietzsche. But yeah, that's about it for this. I don't got anything more to say. If you enjoyed this, you can always send me a message, something else you want to read, or send me a comment. Thanks for watching. I think that'll be it for tonight because this was a semi-long paper and we're about an hour in. So have a good night, everyone. Stay safe out there and try to avoid getting too much revenge.